ran right through the center of his barn, right where the incline goes up to the barn door. The porch on his house is supported by two rails from the railroad, and each of them is twisted a little at the upper end. And I surmise those were the rails that were twisted when the engine fell off the tracks. Mr. Fisher erected a 55-gallon drum of concrete on the rail bed and with a pole sticking up, and that's the exact spot where the wreck occurred. And if your eyes are good and not too much brush, you can still see the roadbed today. If you have a little hummock and there's a little dip in the hummock, that means that they pushed the dirt away and put the rails right through that little dip in the hummock. Well, that's my comments on the lumbering, and now I'm going to ask Terry, my wife, to give us some comments on what the domestic life of a lumber baron was like in the 1880s. Terry?
I'm going to speak briefly. I'm speaking on what the family would be like in the days of the lumbering families, and also what it was like during that time to live at Two Mirrors, where we've had so far 7 generations of our family living there for 143 years. And hopefully we'll have more as our children and grandchildren grow up and eventually have the house. Well, Whitehall was remarkably civilized for a rural town in the mid-19th century. One civilizing influence was the Whitehall Forum weekly newspaper, and the outside pages covered the local news and the inside pages would cover the world news. So Whitehall citizens were quite cognizant of the world outside Whitehall, even though the articles might be 10 or more days out of date. Columns 3 and 4 on page 1 were a summary of events in Whitehall and Montague and could be quite personal. In an 1869 edition we read, Mary Smith, not her real name, gave birth last week to a baby boy, and guess what? There ain't no pa. Oh no, I can't believe they did that. I saw that. The bulk of many articles reflected events in the lives of the mill owners' families, including who went to Grand Rapids or Muskegon and for what reasons, and who was under the weather or getting better. Church activities were always reported in detail, as well as the Masonic Lodge and the Eastern Star activities. There were many cultural activities, such as current events group organized in the ladies' homes, which discussed current topics such as the emergence of Japan as a power in Asia. Their resource material mainly came from the world news part of the forum. And there were still some Indians in the area in the early days. And the Staples family tells of an Indian woman appearing at the back door of Two Mirrors on a rainy, blustery, raw day in late spring. She was obviously looking for food, but was too proud to beg. And Jim's great-grandmother gave her a large roast in the oven, and she went away without a word. In the early days, the kitchens were sometimes in separate buildings, which they started out on our property. But as time went on, they were attached to the house. And big black stoves served as the home heating source in the kitchen in the winter, but were terribly hot all summer long. And Jim remembers helping his grandmother put some of those logs in that black stove. We still use many recipe books, including one from the Methodist Church, which apologizes for one of the recipes, which included an ounce of whiskey. Actually, it was a half a pint, and the Lewis family put that recipe in, and the back of the book said, "This is an error. We shouldn't have put this recipe in the book." And based on jars from our outdoor root cellar, great quantities of pickles and tomatoes were consumed. And some of the jars I referred to were brought in from our sunken outdoor root cellar behind the main house. In one jar, the tomatoes, which Jim and I brought in because we were jacking up some of the wood in there, probably were 100 years old, were still bright red as the day they were canned. We have all these wonderful old mason jars still, and all the crocks and the various jugs. Since the floor of the sunken root cellar was at least 4 feet below ground, the interior was uniformly cool all year long, about 55 degrees. When the family sensed that a very cold night might be coming on, one of the women would occasionally put one or two of these lanterns in the cellar, and the heating given off was enough to prevent the freezing and the cracking. That's one of the lanterns right there. And the bricks for the root cellar came from a brickyard, which operated for a few years in the 1880s on Hanson Street below the Riverview restaurant. I believe the bricks were of medium quality at best because only 3 buildings of that particular brick remain in town today. Indoor plumbing before 1900 was unheard of. So the family had a thunder mug under every bed. That's the white one there with a little crochet top. And water heaters were a 20th century invention. So how was the demand for Saturday night baths handled? Obviously, water was boiled in pots in the kitchen stove, but to extend the quantity of hot water, the bath bricks were used, and we have bath bricks sitting right over there. And these bath bricks were heated in the oven of the kitchen stove Thursday or Friday, and gave off their heat to water in the tub on an early Saturday evening. Later, the Staples family built a 3-story well house just west of the house before 1900, and put a water tank up on the 3rd floor above the 2nd floor of the house. An early gasoline engine pumped the 80 to 90 foot deep well to the 3rd floor tank to create water pressure for running water in the home. And we have the first bathtub in Whitehall, and it's big enough for several people. And in fact, I've had 3 or 4 grandchildren in at once, and it is so big that if I sat in it, I would probably drown because it would be this far till the end. There was no way to prop yourself up. But anyhow, in our well house outside, we have a 100-year-old washing machine, the drying racks, the laundry folding table, which was refinished by my grandchildren, and a soap grinder. And of course, the washing machine is made out of wood, and it looks like it did almost back then. And a few years ago, we had an inoperative well behind the house restored, and we put a new well point at the bottom of the well. And the pump shafts are 2x2 oak rods, about 16 feet in length. And when they pulled all these out to put a new point on, they were in perfect condition. And the Meyer well drilling said we had the purest water in town since it had been down there since the Ice Age. Family records and recollections show that a lumberman's house was a very busy, active place. In addition to the immediate family members, which included a mother-in-law and often a school teacher and a maid, Hiram Staples, as patriarch of the family, answered many distress calls. Hiram's sister married Mr. Knutson of Montague, and they had 2 daughters and a son. And they moved to Texas, where he was a buyer of cattle for the eastern markets. And he always wore a long duster down to his boots on his cattle buying trips to the remote ranches, and he also always carried a loaded pistol because Texas was Texas. One day he came home and handed his duster to Hiram's sister to shake out. The pistol was still in the duster, and the pistol fired, killing her instantly. Mr. Knutson wired Hiram saying he could raise the son but not the 2 daughters. So Hiram took in the daughters, and his parents raised one of them, and Hiram and his wife Rebecca the other. And she lived in the house until she was married. Hiram was very active in the administrative part of the Methodist Church in Michigan, and very frequently had church executives as non-paying guests for days or weeks on end, as executives did their work in the area, opening new churches, consolidating other struggling ones, and so on. And Hiram tithed his income, and several stained glass windows in the Methodist Church attest to the family's devotion to the church. I would like to conclude with a short article published in a magazine about 222 Mary's Avenue, written by one of my granddaughters this past year at age 15, about her memories and feelings of the family home, which I am sure reflect the living ambience of the home in the lumber days. Kate wrote this at age 15. After 7 generations, the old yellow house is still standing strong. It stands strong like the scent of sizzling bacon that lures you out of bed to stumble down those sturdy stairs. Strong like the rope swing's death grip hanging from a canopy of signed trees in the vast backyard, strong like the wind blowing off the lake and through your hair. A laid-back Victorian style welcomes visitors in, just as hot apple cider welcomes autumn. The masculine dark wood dining room table has come to know the bodies of my relatives as we sit around it eating, talking, and playing cards. The cheerful yellow kitchen is caught up in a whirlwind of innocence, making it a simple place to sit and enjoy the morning. The bunk bedroom still echoes with a non-stop giggling heard by our parents as my cousins, siblings, and I supposedly fell asleep. Bound by my family heritage, the old yellow house on White Lake is our anchor. Frozen in time, it harbors the memories of a past I am not familiar with. A past of grandfather clocks ticking as the women of the house tend to chores. A past of pumping your own water out of the bright red pump behind the house. A past of saying too many farewells to war-bound relatives on the green wooden porch. It is the memory keeper of my ancestors, refusing to let go of its hold on time. Because if the old yellow house loosens its reign on the past, who will be there to remember it? Thank you.
Thank you both very much. It's just wonderful to hear you talk, and we could listen for a long, long time. Thank you, thank you.